One of the core pieces of having this convening was to give you an opportunity to listen to the findings of our report, Reimagining the Workforce. You heard me talk about a little bit earlier that we teamed up with the Southern Growth Policies Board, now part of the Southern Governors Association, because this issue is so important to governors and elected officials all over the country. And it's particularly important for us here in the Delta region with all the other challenges that we have to deal with. This is one that we can move forward on because of some unique opportunities and the quality of people that we have in our region. And so we reached out, created a partnership and collaboration with Ted Abernathy and Lindy Hoke, who is here representing Southern Growth Policy Board. And they are the authors of this report. And she's going to go through the major 4 components that I mentioned earlier about how we view a strong workforce development system or plan. And you're going to hear some of the stuff that you heard this morning in terms of the state of workforce development in Arkansas. The importance of life skills, not just job training skills. Realignment of the resources, so when you have a program that is successful like AdTech, who you're going to hear about this afternoon, how do we take that model and scale it? How do we change the funding formula to make sure we are producing those types of programs, that we are rewarding programs that we know that we have all over the state, here at UAPB, at ASU Newport, that's directly tied to training the future's workforce. These 4 recommendations we believe are fundamental. And so we've asked Ted and Linda to come and be a part of this and to go into depth of that report. And you're going to have that information with you. You can take it back, you can study it when you leave, and you can engage with us. We'd love to have your feedback. We'd love to have your interaction about what you think about some of this, because we are trying to literally drill down into this where we're attacking this problem not only from a supply side, but a demand side. And for the most part, in the last 30 or 40 years, we've been doing it from a supply side. And you've heard from Randy, you're going to hear from business and industry today that now it's time to change that. And we must have a holistic, fundamental change in the way that we do business when it comes to workforce development. We feel like this is the first step to do that. So ladies and gentlemen, I give you one of the authors of Reimagining the Workforce, Linda Hoke.
Thanks, Chris. We always appreciated the Delta Regional Authority's support of Southern Growth Policies Board through the years, and especially for your support of this particular report that's so important to the region. So thank you. I wanted to start by looking at a broad level. Why are we here today? Why is this issue so important? So I want to start with this Chinese proverb. When planting for a year, plant corn. When planning for a decade, plant trees. And when planning for life, train and educate people. So this really gets us to the core of why we're talking about this issue today. As Chris said, I'm going to be focusing on the report on the future of the South, which was called Reimagining Workforce Development. And this was written with the support of the Delta Regional Authority. And I was a co-author of the report along with my colleague, Ted Abernathy, when we were with the Southern Growth Policies Board. And our 3 core recommendations in the report are reimagining readiness, re-engage adult learners and disconnected youth, and realign relationships and resources. And I'm going to get into depth on each of those recommendations in my presentation this morning. Our report was informed by research, and this is probably something that many of you have encountered. As Chris said, we've been talking about issues of education and workforce development for many decades. And there's certainly been many reports, commentaries, articles coming out. And it seemed that every week as we wrote a draft of the report, a new report or commentary would come out, and we'd say, oh, well, we really need to include this perspective in the report. And then the next week, another one would come out. So it was difficult and challenging to really synthesize all that information, especially since many of the views were conflicting. One week, we would see a commentary questioning whether college was worth it. And then another report would come out talking about that we need to have college access for all. So while we found this challenging, hopefully we have synthesized a lot of that information and analyzed a lot of that for you. We also do encourage you to look in the back of the report. We included a section in the report called For More Information. So we encourage you to look towards those organizations that are writing on these issues, that are sharing different perspectives, different insights, and we think you can learn by consulting those after these presentations today. One of the things that might be a little bit different is that we also did a lot of listening, and that is incorporated in the report. Southern Growth Policies Board, about a decade ago, had started a process that we called Listening to the South. And through this process, we worked with communities all around the region. Different kinds of groups would sponsor forums in their communities. It might be a chamber of commerce, there might be a forum at a community college. In some cases, they were civic organizations, leadership groups that held forums. But in every case, is usually bringing together different perspectives in a community. So hearing from educators, hearing from the business community. And all over the 10 years that Southern Growth Policies Board had the Listening to the South process, we heard from over 10,000 Southerners about important issues related to economic development. During the course of our work on this Reimagining Workforce Development report, some of the themes that we heard from these conversations are reflected in our recommendations, and so I'll come back to many of these themes as I talk with you this morning. But some of the key themes that we heard was that the pace of change has accelerated. It's really important for us to focus on this issue now, that we really need to stop tinkering at the edges, that we really need to be more bold in what we're doing in terms of changing and reimagining workforce development. We also heard that learning starts before school and that we need to act earlier. One of my favorite quotes from one of the forums was, "They drop out in kindergarten, but hang around to make it official." So again, that we really need to look at starting earlier, that it doesn't just start in school. Another thing that we heard was that we need to promote alternative pathways to success. So often we seem to look to the four-year college as the ultimate goal for everybody, and we tend to overlook some of those alternative pathways that can provide success to many of our students. We also heard that it's not all about technical skills, and that's something that we'll come back to later, and I think that Chris mentioned earlier that it's often those life skills that are really just as important to employers these days. We also heard that businesses need to play a key role, and again, something that was discussed earlier in our panel today. And that success requires a systems approach. We have many promising programs and individual efforts, but many times they're not connected, that we still tend to operate in silos. So those are some of the things that we heard through this listening process. More recently, Ted Abernathy and I have been conducting some forums along with the Kettering Foundation, looking more specifically at the role of higher education. The Kettering Foundation launched this effort in the fall of 2012 to really look kind of behind the headlines and to look at what is the role of education in society and what should it be going forward. And so Ted and I have joined that effort and have been really looking at trying to get at the perspective, especially of the business and economic development community in the South. So we've had a lot of interesting conversations around the region, and some of those are reflected, and I'll share some of those viewpoints with you as well as I go forward on the recommendations. So why did we decide to do this report, and why do we think it's important to take a bold step to really look at reimagining workforce development? It's that we're really faced with a new reality today, and really everything is changing. Some of these changes have been coming over a length of time, and some of them have come at us relatively rapidly. But we're looking at the economy changing, our competition in terms of global competition has changed. We are looking at countries overseas making large investments in workforce development and in early childhood education. We're looking at locational factors for what businesses are looking for changing. We're looking at changing in the demographics of the U.S. workforce. We're looking at changes in gender, more ethnic diversity. We're looking at more age diversity, where for the first time in history, we really have 4 generations in our workforce. We're looking at changing demands for talent, so that every job, as we talked about earlier today, even in manufacturing jobs, they're looking for a higher skill level among our workers. So and a rising talent bar and increasing demands for talent. So really, to sum up, the pace of change and everything else has changed. So that's really brought us to the need to really be bold and to reimagine workforce development. I want to take a look at some of the key trends that are impacting us now, some of the changes that are taking place. One thing that we look at is a change from World War II to more recently, looking at jobs moving from farms and factories more to cubicles. So just before World War II, we were looking at about 1 in 3 jobs being in agriculture and manufacturing. We're now looking at less than 1 in 8 jobs being in those particular fields. So we're seeing where this is not to suggest that manufacturing is declining. In fact, manufacturing is doing very well. It's just become more productive, and so therefore tends to need fewer workers, whereas we're seeing more of a shift towards services, which require more person-to-person kinds of jobs. This is looking at our rising bar for talent. This is U.S. projected job growth over the next very few years, but looking at higher demands for things like associate's degrees, bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, over things like on-the-job training and work experience. So looking at that increasing bar for talent. We're also looking at a shift of work. When the National Center on Education and the Economy looked at this issue back in 2007, they were predicting that more of the routine work would be done by either machines or sourced overseas. More of the creative work, the research and development, the sales and marketing, those types of jobs would be more likely to remain in the United States as we're looking at our global competition. We're also looking at a rise in free agent workers, and these are workers that are doing temporary jobs, freelance work, perhaps piecing together different kinds of jobs. In some cases, this is by choice. Some of the younger generation, prefers that kind of work environment. In some cases, our older workers are finding jobs of that nature after they would normally have retired. So we're finding this kind of free agency across all generations. This is from Kelly Services. When they were looking in 2008, about 28% of workers would consider themselves free agents. Just 5 years later, they were looking at about 40% of workers would consider themselves free agents. So this has a lot of implications in terms of portability of credentials and really looking at that need for kind of lifelong learning. Another trend that is impacting us globally is urbanization. Worldwide, there is certainly a movement towards urban areas, and this is true in the United States as well. If we look here in 2012, over 90% of GDP and 80% of all jobs are in metropolitan areas, and you can see how the concentration of the US population between metro and non-metro areas has changed over time. This has reached the point where over half of the half of the US population now lives in just these 146 counties. Looking at our southern states do tend to be more rural and small city oriented. So this is something that we need to think about in terms of our economic development and workforce development efforts. And this also, we face this conundrum of where we train talent talent seeks a job, and then talent leaves a place. So that's something that kind of underlies our discussions that we particularly need to be mindful of as we are looking at economic and workforce development in our non-metro areas. Technology is certainly having a big impact on our economy and therefore on our workforce and education as well. McKinsey and Company took a look at what they called disruptive technologies, those technologies that they felt were going to disrupt our world, that really would transform our lives, either our economy or our personal lives. And they came up with 12 that they felt were going to be very transformative, including some energy fields, looking at costs coming down, energy storage technologies having a big impact there. Certainly mobile internet applications, advanced materials, next generation genomics, and the impact on healthcare fields as well as agriculture. Things like robotics that have become very much more sensitized and that we're able to use more in not only manufacturing, but also things like healthcare. And things like 3D printing. So with all this kind of as a backdrop, is our education and workforce development programs keeping up? I thought this was an interesting comment that was made by a businessman at one of our forums. Every business has had to change to stay in business, but if we expect our citizens to get the skills they need, those education people will have to change too. So this really is along the lines of what Bill Gates had also said. And I think in some cases we're reaching, it says, his quote was, "The status quo can be changed, but it takes a lot of outrage." And I think we're reaching perhaps that tipping point where a lot of people are feeling maybe not outraged, but that this is a time that we need to be bold, that we need to move ahead. So going back to the report, I want to focus on each one of the key recommendations in the report. Reimagine readiness, re-engage adult learners and disconnected youth, and realign relationships and resources. The first was reimagining readiness. And under that, we suggest 5 key action steps. Those are to strengthen the connections between education and job skills, to rethink credentials and their value in the workplace, to give students more exposure to the world of work, and to scale technology so that every student can benefit from a high-quality, personalized learning experience. First of all, looking at the connection between education and job skills. So this is the participatory part of the presentation. How many think that job preparation should be the top priority of education? Show of hands. Okay. So a few, but a lot don't. And there's certainly a lot of viewpoints on that. There are certainly a lot of other things that education can do to build a better rounded person, to help society, and so forth. Well, from a business perspective, many businesses think that that should be the top priority of education. If we look at top factors for companies considering new investment, availability of skilled labor is at the top of their list. And this has been the case for quite a few years. So it trumps everything else: highway accessibility, labor costs, availability of buildings, any kind of incentives. Number one, availability of skilled labor. These are a couple quotes, again, talking about from the governor's perspective. From the National Governors Association, a top priority of the nation's governors is developing the skilled and knowledgeable workforce required for states to be economically competitive in a global economy. And then from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, in business today, no competition is tougher than the global race for talent. So again, this is a key priority for our business leaders. We also heard some of the same kinds of things at our forums that we held around the region. This top quote is from a a business person, I think higher education should keep in mind who their ultimate customers are. And in this business person's mind, the ultimate customer should be employers in most cases. It wasn't only business people, though, that had this particular viewpoint. The second quote is actually from a higher education leader. And even the higher education said, I think our role is to provide the quality and quantity of workers that give employers in this region a competitive advantage. So I think even academic leaders are beginning to look towards more of that job preparation role at the higher education level. This third quote, higher education needs to step back and prioritize the use of their resources for programs that are relevant to the needs of the workforce instead of doing what they've traditionally done. And in fact, a lot of higher education institutions are doing just that, looking at things like the majors that they offer. Are they leading to jobs? Many states are looking to provide more data to students and their parents as they're considering college options and college majors, to provide them with information on how graduates in certain fields fare in the workplace. So that's something that we're seeing a lot of. This is looking at college freshmen. And this is a survey that's done annually by it's done annually of American freshmen. And this is looking at the percentage of college freshmen that list to be able to get a better job as a key reason for college. And as you'll see, this has gone from 68% in 1976 to 88% in the most recent survey. So, even students, again, are looking at that importance of the job as a reason to go to college. So if job preparation is a key priority for many, what are employers looking for? Well, on a humorous note, in this cartoon, it says that employers are looking for someone with the wisdom of a 50-year-old, the experience of a 40-year-old, the drive of a 30-year-old, and the pay scale of a 20-year-old. So. To be a little more serious about this, I want to take a look at the U.S. military. And the U.S. military is the nation's largest employer. So what are they thinking, and how has their thinking changed about what they're looking for in a worker? This is what Martin Dempsey, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said. In the past, we wanted men who are physically fit, educated, and disciplined. And now we want someone who wants to belong to a value-based group, who can communicate, who is inquisitive, and who has an instinct to collaborate. I also want to take a look at this from the National Association of Colleges and Employers. Top skills that employers say they want in 2014. We often think that it's going to be that technical skill, that's going to be the core thing that employers are looking for, but you'll see that it's down number 7 on the list. So really, what employers are looking for are the ability to work in a team, the ability to solve problems and make decisions, communication, things that they feel are above, that technical knowledge. I think that was one of the discussions that we were having earlier this morning as well. That often they feel like that technical component they can teach people later, but it's these other types of skills that they think are very important to bring to the job. So we're looking at really 3 key types of skills, those job-specific skills, such as construction, such as a welder, or those things that are very specific to a certain job. Looking at work skills like communication, problem solving, critical thinking, but we're also looking at life skills, things such as honesty, dependability, teamwork, a positive attitude. And from what we heard in our forums and conversations, not wearing flip-flops when you come to an interview, looking someone in the eye and shaking their hand. As my colleague Ted Abernathy likes to call them, those skills your mama ought to taught you. So When we're looking at barriers to employment, in fact, it's often those things that fall into that life skills category that are big barriers to employment. I heard somebody saying sobriety today, and that really fits kind of with what we've heard as well. Things like drug tests, criminal background checks, credit checks, social media checks. A lot of these things that fall into the life skills are what we often call soft skills category. So I want to talk about rethinking credentials and their value in the workplace. The report challenges us to rethink some of our common and long-standing assumptions. And one of them is that the four-year college needs to be the ultimate goal for everyone. A second is that a credential equals competence. And a third, that college readiness equals college and career readiness. Much of our recent focus has been on expanding college for all, and this is clearly an important goal and one that we've seen significant progress with. I've just mentioned a couple of national initiatives here. The Lumina Foundation, which works a lot on this issue, has a 2025 goal of 60% higher education attainment. Also looking at the Talent Dividend Project that's taking place in many of our metro areas across the country. And it's based on research that shows that raising the median adult four-year college attainment rate of the top 51 metro areas just 1 percentage point would be associated with an increase of income of $143 billion per year for the nation. So again, this is an important goal and one that has seen significant progress. And one of the reasons why it's an important goal is that we can look at earnings and unemployment rates by educational attainment and show that really our median earnings are much higher as you go up the educational scale, and our unemployment rate is much lower as you go up the educational scale as well. We're also looking at a rising earnings disparity between young adults with and without a college degree. As you can see here, the gap is increasing between in the disparity of income. But as I said, we are making progress in this area. This chart shows the years of school completed. In 1980, some 32% had some college and 17% a bachelor's degree, and this had increased rather significantly by our most recent figures. But our conversation has really evolved from how can we get people to get more degrees to our credentials meeting employer needs on the one hand, and our credentials meeting student needs. In fact, do their credentials have value in the workplace? So one thing that we're finding is that there is a perception gap between business and academic leaders. And this is, these are two recent polls, one by Gallup and Inside Higher Education, in which 96% of college and university chief academic officers said that they were either extremely or somewhat confident in their institution's ability to prepare students for success in the workplace. And then in contrast, we have the Gallup Lumina Foundation poll that asked business leaders the same type of question and found that just 11% of business leaders strongly agree that today's college graduates have the skills and competencies that their business needs. So we're looking at a large gap in perception there. We're also looking at a gap in our middle skills area. While we are promoting college for all, we're often overlooking alternative pathways for success for many of our students. And we're finding that many businesses are looking at gaps in that middle skills area. Those kinds of jobs that could be obtained with perhaps a certificate program or a 2-year degree rather than a 4-year degree. Many students are also beginning to and their parents are beginning to question, is college worth it? As we're looking at college tuition outpacing the median family income, the cost of medical care, food, and housing. So looking here at soaring college tuitions, it's certainly called into question whether college is worth it, and people want to make sure that their going to college will result in value in the workplace. So when we're talking about this issue, we're also looking, some of the things that we heard in our Shaping the Future forums, are we talking about 2 or 4 year institutions, or are we really talking about the skills and competencies that people need that they can get at any stage in their life? I think long-term, industry may not be interested in those as interested in those milestone certifications, like a degree or a master's or a PhD. And in fact, there are some fields like computer work that already a credential may not be as important as competency. So we're looking kind of at that balance between competency and a credential. This comment I thought was also interesting. I think we're going to see a lot more blurring as students are accessing information on YouTube and they acquire skills however they can come by them. As long as they can do a job, industry may not care anymore about the actual piece of paper. So again, a show of hands, how many have learned how to do something on YouTube? It might be putting up drywall, learning a new dance step. So just about everybody, okay? How many know someone, or perhaps yourself, that's done a tutorial on Khan Academy? Okay. And how many have taken an online class, or known as a MOOC, a massive online open class? So a few of you? Okay. Well, there are a lot more opportunities now to gain skills. So, we have online classes, the Khan Academy. We're looking at virtual high schools. We're looking at e-textbooks that may be used to provide students with supplementary materials or videos that can complement the written text. We're looking at digital gaming content where you can do some competency-based work. So as that one quote said, there are a lot of places that students can gain skills now that were not available just even 10 years ago. This is my own experience with this. It was actually this report that prompted me to try my first massive online open class. I was looking up some research on how the massive online open classes had the trend and kind of looking at what the figures, how many students have been reached so far. And I was visiting the edX website to update some figures for the report and saw that they were going to be offering an introduction to biology class that was starting soon. Well, my daughter was actually working on her PhD in biology at MIT at the time. So I thought, wow, I'm a political science major, so I don't understand anything that she's talking about. This might be a good way for me to pick up a few words at least to understand maybe something more about her research. So I decided to jump in and take the class, and it was actually a very awesome experience. I learned a lot from it. I learned some about biology, but one of my key learnings was, first of all, what was I thinking? I signed up for this class at MIT, and I had not had any science, basically, being a political science major. I had not had any science since high school, and that was like 30 years ago. So it was a real challenge for me, where they suggested that it might be 6 to 8 hours of homework a week. I think I was spending a minimum of 15, and that was my need to, before I could even read the readings, I would have to go find easier readings so that I could understand their readings. But some of the other things that I learned was one, it does provide access to some really leading thinkers. This particular class was taught by Eric Lander, who was one of the lead players in the Human Genome Project. And his enthusiasm about biology is contagious. I was telling my husband that I think if anybody took this course that was thinking about a career or a major, I think they would just have to be a biology major. He's so enthusiastic about the topic. I also was, I guess my expectations, I really wasn't sure what to expect. And I thought it may just be a professor, standing up there giving an hour lecture. It wasn't like that at all. It was very engaging. They break everything down kind of to our YouTube level where they present things in about 15-minute modules. So it allows you to, listen to part of a lecture for 15 minutes. And, at some points it may be that I need to stop here because I don't understand what's going on, and I need to read something more so I can understand what he was just talking about, or I need to re-listen to this, or I need to go make dinner, so I'll come back. But it was very nicely broken down into these different levels. There are also a lot of opportunities for enrichment. So where the professor might be talking about a particular concept, then there would be some additional talks that would be available for you to hear from MIT professors about their research that was related to the topic that the professor was just talking about. There would be opportunities to, because we couldn't do a lab, for example, to watch graduate students performing some of the labs, on video, so that we could see at least what some of the equipment was like and how that worked. So anyway, it was a very interesting and enlightening experience for me that led directly from this report. So I encourage any of you that haven't tried it yet, give it a try. So one of the interesting things is, well, how are employers viewing some of these new kinds of training opportunities? There was an interesting survey that was just done, that just came out, of North Carolina employers that was done by Duke and RTI. And they found that about 3/4 of the employers that they surveyed had positive views with respect to the potential influence in hiring decisions. I noted that it was even higher for those who had actually heard of MOOCs. So a lot of them had not actually heard of them. When it was described, they said, oh yes, that sounds like something that would be very positive. One of the things that they viewed it as positive was that they thought that it would show motivation, that employee was interested in further learning, and that it may not necessarily be a particular skill that they gained from that online course, but just that they showed that they were wanting to engage in further learning. And then more than 3/4 either had used or considered using or could see their companies using a massive online open class for employees' professional development. So as we're looking at this issue of competency versus credential, there are a number of things that are going on in this area. We're looking at career readiness credentials, and a lot of states are doing work in that area. We're looking also at increasing attention to competency-based educational models, things like Western Governors University, where classwork or your progression is based more on your competency and mastery of certain skills rather than your seat time. We're also looking at Lumina Foundation, which is undertaking a degree qualifications profile. It's working with colleges around the nation to look at what does it mean to have a college degree? What should this mean? What are some of the minimum things that our graduates should know? We're also looking at things, some experimentation with things like digital badges. We've earned people in Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts here. Okay, I was a Girl Scout leader for 13 years, so you earn earn badges to show your competency in different kinds of skills. So this is something similar, but looking at, are there ways that we can have digital badges that people can carry with them, be portable throughout life, that they show that they've mastered certain skills. So there's a lot going on in this area of looking at competency versus credentials. Another thing that we heard and that we recommended in the report is to give students more exposure to the world of work. From the employer's perspective, there's a quote where employers admit that the degree alone is not the ace it once was. Now they emphasize work experience as a way to make yourself stand out. And we're also looking at it from the need for students to have more exposure to the world of work, especially in a career awareness perspective. These are a couple of quotes that we heard at our Shaping the Future forums. So many of our students don't know life beyond a 2-mile radius. As a result, 70% want to be a nurse because that's all they've heard about, and that's the only job that they know that pays well. Similarly, if people knew that there were welding career opportunities that potentially could make between $40,000 and $80,000 a year, then maybe they'd go into welding. So again, there are a number of approaches that states and communities are taking to give students more exposure to the world of work. The first, career awareness campaigns. And I did note that the Arkansas Chamber just recently, I think, concluded a series of young manufacturers academies in Arkansas, where there were some 600 students, I think, around the state that were learning more about manufacturing careers. I know that Arkansas has also been involved in career coaching, a number of other types of efforts that are being pursued in Arkansas and elsewhere around the country, career academies that combine work experience with academics, apprenticeship programs, internships, externships for teachers so that they have exposure to the world of work and they can bring that experience back to their students. And also looking at employer-academic partnerships that go beyond just a monetary donation from the business community. We are also, a recommendation is to scale technology so that every student can benefit from a high-quality, personalized learning experience. And this quote, I think, is telling. In contrast to trends to personalized products, services, and the use experienced throughout our economy, society, and daily lives, education has only scratched the surface on personalizing the user experience. We do find some promising approaches, though, to personalized learning, and they have included creating individualized education plans for students, conducting personalized assessments of students, looking at things like flipped learning, where there's a different combination of face-to-face and online learning, where you might use the online part for something like a lecture that can be recorded. So students might watch the lecture online and to use that valuable class time really for the teacher to go more in depth in discussion of that particular issue or to work on with students one-on-one. So we're seeing more, looking at different classroom and educational models. Also looking at developing online credit recovery courses to motivate underachieving students. The report also talks to the importance of re-engaging adult learners and disconnected youth. In looking at re-engaging adult learners, the importance of this is that more than 2/3 of the workforce in 2020 and nearly half of the workforce in 2030, they're already in the workforce today. So while we're talking about educational reform, most of our educational reforms are not going to be reaching that particular group. One group that's particularly ripe for reaching out to are workers with some credits but no credentials. And this looks at Americans over 25 with some post-secondary education but no degree. And as you can see, we have a large population that falls into that category. We're doing a better job of getting people into college, but we still need to work on that component of getting them through college. And then, as I said, kind of recovering some of these folks that do have have started college and have some work towards college but do not yet have a degree. So some common features of trying to recover these adult learners are flexibility, looking at flexible enrollment periods, things like compressed course schedules, and the ability to do work online where they may not have to travel to a remote, possibly remote location. Also looking at time issues, efforts to shorten the time to a degree, including looking at what we call prior learning assessments or looking at credit for prior learning, be it through the military, be it through work experience, be it through other types of gaining skills. Also looking at affordability, efforts to shorten the time to the degree also, of course, would make education more affordable, but access to financial aid is often a problem for returning students as well. And often there isn't as much financial aid available for those returning students, so that's something that many states are beginning to look towards. Also, looking at support and the need for kind of those academic and family social supports, things like childcare, transportation, that may be an issue for those that are returning to school. In terms of helping dislocated workers rejoin the workforce, we find that challenges are particularly acute for older workers and for those with lower levels of education. So some of the responses have been programs targeting these groups, such as Program Breakthrough, which targets low-skilled adults, again, trying to work with different support systems to provide that transition and support for that population. And things like the American Association of Community Colleges Plus 50s initiative, which was initially started when they were thinking that perhaps retirees would be looking for, some small, recreational pursuits in their retirement years, and now they're finding that they're really, they're gearing it more towards reskilling people for different kinds of careers. We're also looking at the importance of recovering disconnected youth, and I think this might have been mentioned this morning. Looking at the percentage of young people that are not in school, that are not working, and that have no degree beyond high school. And as you can see, that figure is approaching 18% or so, I think, in Arkansas. So, we're looking at a group that doesn't have a lot of future to it unless we do try to recover these youth. Also wanted to look at the importance of this, and we're looking at an unemployment rate that is very high for that teen group. Our final recommendation was to realign relationships and resources. So I want to take a look at some of the key actions under that. One was that we really need to create more continuity from early childhood through career. And some of these quotes do look at our current system where K-12 and post-secondary education exist in separate worlds in the United States. We're also looking at often a lack of alignment between what employers are looking for and what skills are being taught, and this has become a critical problem for U.S. competitiveness. We're also looking at the need to align and track data across the pipeline. So in the good news, Arkansas and Delaware were the first states to achieve all state actions that were recommended by the Data Quality Campaign. Some of these included creating progress reports with individual student data to improve student performance, to create reports that include longitudinal statistics to guide system-wide improvements, and to develop a P-20 workforce research agenda. We also spoke to the importance in the report of engaging businesses in a meaningful way. And Bruce Vandal, in his report, Revving the Education Engine, really looked at kind of what he felt were three key ways to engage businesses. One was the development of a more diverse assessment instruments to measure and certify skills and competencies in demand in the workplace. The second was to align education and workforce data systems. And the third was to develop customized instructional models to meet the needs of a diverse student population. So, what to do next with all of this information? Well, this might be our inclination, but I'm hoping that this will not be the next response. As Chris mentioned, we had 3 R's. We added a 4th R, and that was to ramp up. I've included this, perhaps somewhat controversial quote from Mark Tucker. Those of you that know Mark Tucker know that he is known for making somewhat controversial statements sometimes. So a statement that he made at Southern Growth's 2012 conference was, we have at least one example of something great happening in every area of education and workforce development. The last thing we need is more innovation. What we need is to learn how to take things to scale. So I think that's our next challenge. There is a lot of interesting work going on, a lot of interesting programs that we did highlight in the report, and encourage you to look to those for examples, and perhaps as the Senator mentioned this morning, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There may be some things happening that we can learn from other states. So we encourage you to do that, but also to think in terms of making this more of a system-wide effort, and to really ramp this up rather than starting yet another series of individual programs. One thing that I do encourage you to do, and one way of starting to bring together some of these diverse perspectives from the business, academic community, educators, and so forth, is perhaps to start a dialogue at your community level. There are a lot of resources available to start a dialogue. These are some of the resources that are available. They're usually available for free. I also have some materials from the Kettering Foundation that I'll put down here if folks are interested, on the Shaping the Future dialogue materials that look at the future of higher education. And many of these issues that we talked about today are brought up in that particular set of dialogue materials, and they are available for free. So I'll set out a few of these here. The materials are available also on the Kettering Foundation's website. There's an introductory video, and there are participant discussion guides and moderator discussion guides. So I do recommend that as a starting point if your community is looking for a way to really bring those different perspectives and people from different sectors together. That can often be a way to get people talking about the same issues. So I think my time is about up, but I did want to see if there are a few questions that I could answer. And if not, I think I'm probably in the way of lunch, so I think our lunch boxes are out there, and I'll be available during lunch if you want to informally come up and ask me a question. But thank you very much.